My name is Mary Kaufman. I'm a senior park aide here at Humboldt Redwoods State Park. And this is the first interview with Dave Stockton. It is October 3rd, 2019.
Okay, well, to start with, a lot of the history of Southern Humboldt is involved with my family, or my family's involved with the history of Southern Humboldt. My great-grandfather, Andrew Jackson Stockton, came up from Bakersfield and built a cheese factory in Garberville. But he also got heavily involved in the politics of the time, which were not very pretty. I know for a fact he was in on the Shelter Cove Massacre, which was a horrific event that the pioneers taught the Native Americans that they had a terrible curse on them. They were going to die unless they jumped off the cliff at Shelter Cove. But he was always in on these kind of shady things. There was this wonderful project laid out to build a super freight trade route from Garberville to Petrolia. They had had a falling out with shipping in Shelter Cove. It was also very difficult to get to Shelter Cove, even up until the 1940s, these horse and wagons, because it was so steep. So the plan was to build a superhighway from Garberville to Edwardsburg, to the top of the ridge, and then down the other side they built a 4-mile railroad out the mouth of the Atoll to the ocean, and then out the mouth of the Atoll they built a dike, and there was a rock out there that they built a harbor. They could ship things out of there. Well, it was going along swimmingly until some cagey reporter from Garberville started investigating, and it seemed as though the right-of-way was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and all these speculators come in and bought property figuring they would turn it over for a big profit when this highway went in. And of course he exposed them, and the project got dropped for 30 years until Calvin Stewart picked it up again and built the harbor and shipped things out. The railroad was built. The engine there, the Atoll River Railroad, is in the Railroad Heritage Association. It's on display up there. You can still see it. But anyway, my grandfather got involved with abuse of Native Americans to a degree that my great-grandmother divorced him, and he left the country in disgrace. She had 2 young boys. The oldest boy got killed in a plowing accident when he was 11 years old out in Petrolia. And so she had twin boys, my grandfather and his twin brother. And she brought the boys up, and she did not have very good judgment as far as the men goes, because she married worse the second time, to a doctor. Like I say, that's family history, but it's also involved with the local history. It was a Dr. Felt, and they built a resort in Fortuna at Newburgh, because they were a great believer in mineral waters back in those days. Well, my grandfather left. He ran away because his stepfather was abusive, and he wouldn't punish them in the normal way. He would just get a poker and put it in the fire, then burn his back. This is what they did. Well, his twins stayed, but he ran back out to Petrolia, and the Native Americans picked him up. They liked him. His nickname was Happy. And so they gave him their land and made a successful enterprise, ranching out of it, sheep and cattle. And they had one rule: no paper money. They wanted to be paid in gold. So my dad said they'd go to the Bank of Ferndale. Payday was once a year. He'd go in the kitchen, and on the dining room table would be $5,000 in gold, and the workers would come in and get their pay for the year, which he paid better than most people did.
Were all the workers Native American, you're saying?
It was their land. It was given to them as a reservation. There was another black eye as far as America goes. In theory, the Indian reservation was supposed to be from the Humboldt County line up to the Eel River and all the way to the mouth of Eel River. And of course, they didn't even get a tenth of that, or a hundredth of that. You know, that's, well, of course, when Frederick McKee came through and made all these promises, and then Congress didn't follow through. But like I say, that's all the bad stuff in the past. So anyway, my grandfather farms in Petrolia, and he's very successful. He does it really well. He's so successful that the ranchers there would give him their products to take to market in San Francisco, and he would buy and sell down there for what they wanted to bring back up here. And it was a prosperous region, just on the Wildcat. There was one year in the 1880s where 10 ranches shipped 400,000 pounds of butter in like 5 months. You know, and this is all milking by hand. And like I say, it was a prosperous region. Well, sad to say, time came, my father had 5 younger sisters. And to go to high school then, you farmed your children out to someone in Ferndale, and they went to Ferndale High. Well, my grandfather went the other way. He bought a dairy in Shively and brought the 5 girls and my dad over to go to school, at high school, and then so that took place. And of course, my grandfather was great with critters. They had 40 cows, and he and my dad and a helper milked 40 cows by hand, morning and night. And it was a very successful dairy. So
this was in the
Shively. 1920s.
1920s?
Yeah.
And the girls were expected to go to school?
Well, they wanted to go to school. They wanted to go to high school because Petrolia only had an elementary school. So they got to go to Fortuna High School, which was good for them. So anyway, Dad worked there, and then he got involved with the lighthouse service. His Uncle Valley, Malcolm Cady, got him a job, and then he worked at the lighthouse at Petrolia and Trinidad and in San Rafael. And while he was at San Rafael, there was a quarry next door, and he was fascinated. This expert, this explosive expert, was teaching him how to use explosives. And he would work in this quarry, and this is where he picked up his dynamite skills. And then he also loved to dance. So on Saturday night, he would go to San Francisco and get in these ballroom competition dances, which is a really big deal back then. And so he loved it. He would ballroom dance competition. So anyway, he's working down there, and then 2 of the girls graduated from high school, and they wanted to go to college. So Dad came up, and then he started college, and he went to Humboldt State. He got in a couple years in there, and he'd worked in the summer in the woods. He was a choker setter and powder monkey.
What's a choker setter?
That's where you get the huge steam donkeys, which send out a big line, and then there were lines off of that, and you would go hook it on the individual logs. And then when everybody got hooked up, then the whistle pump would signal. They had so many blasts on the whistle when the donkey was taking up the slack and pulling the logs up to the landing. That was the first time they could take logs uphill. With oxen and with horses, it always went downhill. So here they could set the donkey way up on a plateau, and they would bring the logs up there, and then they could usually put them on the railroad. That's what they normally did. Anyway, so the problem was, if a log was over 10 feet in diameter, it wouldn't fit on a rail car. So Dad would mix black powder and dynamite, because black powder was too fast, it would shatter a tree, or stumping powder was too slow. So he mixed them, and then he would put a shot, and he'd open either a half or to quarter it, and then they could fit it on the car and take it to the mill.
That sounds pretty dangerous.
Well, yeah, most of those powder monkeys didn't have all their fingers.
How'd your dad do?
He did great, and I couldn't believe, because he would put a cap and a fuse, and he'd clamp down on it with his teeth, and clamp it shut, and that could blow your head off if it went off, But anyway,
How old was he when he was doing that?
he was in his 20s and 30s.
Were you around yet?
Oh no, no. So he was going along, he working somewhere in the woods and going to Humboldt State, and two of his sisters wanted to go to college. So he quit college, and he became obsessed about me going to college. He quit college and he put three of his sisters through college, and working out in the woods. And he was a geology major, and he told his professor, you know, he says, I'll go out tomorrow in the woods and I'll make more than a full professor does. And that's how, you know, how the opportunity was. Dangerous work, but it was paid good. And that's what he did.
Who was he working for?
First at Pacific Lumber. Then he got his leg crushed. A donkey was pulling logs up with his cable, and the cable broke, and it got like a whip, and it hit him and threw him way up in the air and crushed his leg. Well, Scotia Hospital happened to have the famous Dr. Cottrell. He was specializes in mangled flesh and broken bones. And any other doctor would have amputated my dad's leg, but Cottrell figured he could save it. So Dad was in the hospital, and of course he got in good with Cottrell, because Cottrell was very fond of whiskey. And my dad's friends would sneak him in beer and whiskey, and so on his night rounds, his Cottrell would come by and they would share the spoils. So this went on for a couple of weeks, and then Cottrell kind of went in one day and told my dad, he said, I'm not getting your bones lined up right. He said, I'm going to have to re-break your leg. So tomorrow morning when you wake up, you finish off that whiskey and we'll get you and I'll reset your leg. Fine. So next morning, Dad gets up, you know, and he finishes the whiskey. They wheel him off to this room off there, and this emergency call comes in. This guy's in this horrible motorcycle accident, and they call Cottrell out. He spends all day with this guy restoring his leg. So anyway, he's getting ready to go home, and the nurse says, you didn't reset Sam's leg. Oh, takes his hat off, he goes in. Of course, the whiskey'd worn off hours ago, and grabs my dad's leg and just goes like this, and goes pop, pop. And Dad said, just see stars. It just hurt so bad. And Cottrell said, just relax, Sam, this won't take a minute, you know, and he gets his leg reset. Well, anyway, it worked out really well. And Cottrell told him, he said, now, you're going to be fine, your bone's set right, but there's some of your ligaments I couldn't get lined up the way I wanted to, so when you get to be an old man, they're going to really hurt you because they'll start shriveling up. And Dad got to 75 before that happened, you know, and I could notice he started limping then. And he said that old Sawbones was right, you know, this. But anyway, so he got his sisters through school, and then he gets married. And so he and my mother have these dreams, they're going to...
Was she local?
Yeah. In fact, she was born next door to my farm. And so this was their little piece of paradise. 1937, they bought this little farm, 10 acres, and they had to make $25 month payments, which just scared them to death, because that was a fortune back then. See, wages were 68 cents an hour, and Dad got 30 cents more an hour than anybody else. So anyway, they were so far in debt. I can't believe how optimistic they were. You know, at 55 flood, we had drawers of bills, and I took them out and let them dry, and years later I went back, and I couldn't believe how far in debt they were. The Pepperwood store, which was huge, it was like a Payless is today. They had a post office, they had clothes, they had feed, they had food, you know, just general store, everything you wanted. And 1948, they had a $600 bill at the store, Pepperwood. They had Marcus's, was a feed company, Ferndale, $400 bill. They borrowed $2,500 to build their dream house, which my mother designed, and she had a beauty shop in the house, and she bought, you know, a shampoo sink and dryers, and that put them another $2,500 in the hole. So they were just happy as could be.
Is that common then?
Yeah.
Common practice?
Faith in the future. People have a lot of faith in the future.
What were their names?
Sam was my dad, and Rose was my mother. And
What was her maiden name?
Thompson. Yeah. Yeah, it's, and it's mind-boggling how primitive it was. You know, they had this little cabin. They did have running water. They didn't have indoor plumbing. When it rained very hard, the roof would leak so bad that my mother would use up all the dishes catching the rain on the floor. And when she ran out of dishes, she would use metal pans, which drove my dad crazy because they would ping, ping, ping. So she'd put water in there to get it started. You know, it's primitive, you know, and it's, I can still remember when they got in indoor toilet. That was absolute luxury, you know, that was, because they got cold, you know, there's some real cold times. But anyway, so they're going great on their place, you know, and just happy as a couple clams. And 1952, she had a blood clot, and she died at 34 years old. And so Dad wanted to leave the country, and everybody talked him into staying. So what do you do with, you got a 9-year-old kid, you know, you got to raise this kid plus working. And he worked, you know, he worked from daylight to dark out in the woods, milked 6 cows morning and night, you know, and then anytime he could get out of bite to eat and maybe watch an hour of television, and that was it. So he stayed, he liked that life, you know, and that was good. 55 flood came along, no big deal. 3 feet of water in the house, mop and a broom, we were back in there in a week. So we, you know, we both worked the place. I'd help him with the cows.
When did you start? What age?
Well, right after my mother died, because she helped him with the cows. So I was 9. So anyway, when I
So he wasn't working as a logger anymore.
Oh yeah, he worked full time.
And milk and had
And had the cows, and then we had a garden. He raised 200 flat-headed Dutch cabbage. We had a lot of Eastern Europeans, made coleslaw and mainly sauerkraut. And we had orchard. We had about 50, 60 trees. So there's stuff going on all the time.
So you were selling this locally?
Mm-hmm. Right there on the place. Had people come out there 50 years. They, you know, they would come out, and he had a huge variety. He never did much for eating apples. We had 30 different kinds of apples. And he, mainly for cooking, dehydrating, freezing, you know, a few for eating, school kids. So that part, you know, we did that, plus the cows, plus the garden. And then hay. We cut our own hay. And so then when the early 50s came along, we leased 2 other places. And did mainly hay with that. So, yeah, it was a going proposition. And he was so good at milking. I didn't milk. He was so good at 6 cows, maybe 8-10 minutes apiece. He was done.
And where the milk was sold as milk?
Mm-hmm. Well, I went to the creamery. We had big metal cans, and they went to the creamery. One of the strange things, I grew up, when I got the cows, I would get the cows, and then Dad come in, he'd start milking them. I had this canister of DDT, and I would spray all the cows with DDT. Now, back then, it was considered a godsend, you know, and they had no clue what it was like back then.
You mean the udders you'd spray?
No, mainly the backs where the flies would go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and but you know, it's still in the ground. It doesn't leak. You know, there are places here that were dairies, they wanted to do organic gardening and they couldn't. You plant carrots, they absorb their DDT, and then you can figure out how much is still left in the ground. So anyway, so he hammered in my head when the 64 flood came along. He just hammered that I had the money to fix the house. He said, "No way, you're going back to college," which I did, you know. And so when I went to college, then he sold the cows. So then he was looking for, he had a 5-year gap to when he was going to retire. So he started developing the orchard, planting trees. And so by the time, excuse me, by the time I got, I was over halfway through college when I volunteered for the draft. The flood came and I quit school, and of course when you quit school, you went in the draft.
So which war would this be?
Vietnam. So anyway, yeah, it was 30 something. So anyway, I went. It was so funny because the Army with the physicals were just hilarious. You know, you go in there and they'd line you up. You know, that was the only fast lines you went through in the Army. All the rest you waited for a long time. And I remember the eye test. You know, I took the eye test, and this guy behind me had these real thick glasses, and they said, "Take your glasses off." And he said, "Read what's on the chart." And the guy goes, "What chart?" "Pass, next." You know, and this is kind of the way it was. So anyway, I got that through, and then
How long were you out of the country?
year. Yeah, I was a year and a day, actually a year and 2 days, Vietnam, and that was quite an experience. I would never trade that experience, but I would never want to do it again. You know, dodging bullets for 70 cents an hour is not much of a career path. So anyway, came back, got married, went to school, and my dear wife put me through school with the promise that when I finished and she had a chance, she would go through school.
So what years were these now?
70 to 72.
And were you at HSU?
Yeah.
What were you taking?
English. Yeah. So anyway, I got through school, and then for 4 years I taught night school at CR. You know, that was kind of fun. Ironically, it was history that I was teaching. My degree was in English, but I made up a class by the request of the school for retired people. And so this is what I did. So I went off for 4 years. It was a lot of fun. Enjoyed that. And then I kind of ended my career with the park, because I'd worked in the park since 1960. And 72, I think, was my last year that I worked there. And but there was a whole different mindset with that time in the early 60s. The 55 flooded came. We had gotten, I think, 7 professors from the UC Berkeley Forestry Department to come out and study the effects of the flood on the redwood forest, because they had lost 300 trees in Rockefeller. You know, that was a pretty bitter pill. And because they had all this effort to save the trees, then all of a sudden they're turned around and whoop, you know, 300 trees are gone in the middle of Rockefeller.
Well, what was your family's relationship with the park as the park was developing, as your father being a logger, and then what was your relationship with it when you were growing up as a child?
It was hostile.
That led you to...
It was hostile. I spent some time out in Bull Creek. My uncle logged out there, and it was, but my dad, he was one of these people that could see the writing on the wall. He said, "Now, you're not too good to go work out in the woods or in the sawmill, but go down to the park, try something different." And this is what I did. You know, I started here on the 5th of July, 1960, working at Hidden Springs, cleaning restrooms. And
Was it a permanent position?
no, it was park aid, $295 a month. And so, yeah. So then I came back the next year, and I got on the garbage crew and the litter crew, and then the 3rd year I came back, they put me on a park patrol because I could go out at Bull Creek, because a lot of the old Bull Creekers would come back and poaching deer, you know, in the park. And so I knew, you know, I knew most of the people. I knew the turf out there, where they were supposed to be and where they weren't supposed to be. So I worked patrol for quite a while, and enjoyed that thoroughly. I thought that was just too good to be true, to be out here in the woods and getting paid for it. And my territory was, I started at Red Crest. I go up Peavine, come down at Bear River, the pond, and then I would go around Fox Camp. Pacific Lumber guys had a roadblock there, and I'd stop and tell them if I'd seen anybody, any poachers, or what was going on. Panther Gap, and I would go down Kemp Road at Panther Gap, come up on the backside of Grasshopper, and then back down to Bull Creek Road. That was, like I say, it was just too good to be true. You know, you go out there, and Peavine Ridge was just postcard every 5 feet. Just beautiful. You get up on Horse Prairie, and you're looking down at the Cow Creek watershed, and it's just spectacular. I always thought it was one of the most beautiful places on the face of the earth.
Were you typically on your own?
Yeah. Almost always.
In a park vehicle?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was, well, like I say, I knew the territory, and you know, and then just 200 yards from that beautiful overlook at the Cow Creek watershed, you've got your first getting into the woods, and you have this straight path that goes gently up the hill, and this beautiful corridor of trees. A couple of grand firs were up there. And Horse Prairie was an old ranch. Uncle Will Turner, he had that. He had all the property from Horse Prairie down to Red Crest. And it was a sheep ranch way back when. There was a cookhouse up there, split crew. There was a split camp right at the headwaters of Cow Creek, which is natives called Corduroy Creek.
What year was this?
Split camp was probably in the 20s, in the cookhouse, yeah. The earliest picture I have of Horse Prairie is 1948, when the park got all the property around it, part of the expanded Rockefeller Forest. So that was beautiful, beautiful country up there.
So as you were growing up, before you actually got a job at the park, did you have a relationship with the park, with
No,
people in the park?
But I was in a lot of the park roads, Peavine Ridge. I'd gone up there, gone out to the giant tree when I was 8 years old. You know, I was impressed. I was really, you know, impressed with it. You know, it was staggering how pretty it was. You know, and how neat it was. And like I say, I didn't get involved with the Rangers until, you know, I started working here in patrol mainly. Then I got to see some of these college professors. I never got to meet him, but Dr. Ralph Cheney come up here, who was a famous paleontologist. Let's see who else. There were some really neat people. Well, after the '55 flood, the Bull Creek watershed unraveled. Horrible, horrible time. Nothing they did seemed to even slow it down. It was just awful. They did all these different things to try and control the ocean, the erosion in the Bull Creek watershed. And nothing seemed to work. You know, it's just such a delicate ecology, and it was stripped down. Now, a lot of people, there's a lot of name calling and bitterness and about why the watershed unraveled. And my take on it was that the county, Humboldt County, imposed a standing timber tax. So you could not afford to have timber because you get taxed on it when it was still standing, which to me was just horrible. You know, so all these guys were cutting their timber just to avoid this really unfair tax. And of course, after, you know, 6 or 7 years of this, Cuneo was the worst. If Cuneo Creek wasn't there, there would have been 1/10 of the erosion, you know. But all the creeks unraveled.
How, excuse me, how many years did you do the patrolling for the park?
Oh, I think up until 1970. Yeah, about 7 years. It was mostly in the summer. I quit school for a year when the flood came. I quit school another year. There were 2 or 3 times I was too proud to accept money from my dad, and I was putting myself through school. And so I'd run out of money, so then I'd quit and come back, and the park always hired me. You know, they were real good about that. Even after I got married, I was working on my master's, and I was working at Grizzly Creek, and I did a full 40 hours, but then seminars were at night, so I had two nights I went in for seminars, and then I got the other class days kind of jockeyed around so I could work full time, which they were very good about that. That was so nice. I never would have been able to do it without them. By then I was married and had a child, you know, and it was even.
Where were you living then?
We actually lived in Grizzly Creek, and but I knew the territory here, so I get called over here most of the time. I would drive from Grizzly Creek to here, you know, and then work 8 hours, and then go back, and then 2 or 3 days a week I'd work at Grizzly Creek. So.
You lived at the park in Grizzly Creek?
Yeah. Everything from maintenance to campfire programs. Yeah.
What was your title? Do you remember?
Parkade.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And
Yeah.
how long was that for? When did you end? What year did?
73 or 70, somewhere around there. They had a program where they were trying to build their maintenance staff, and they had a temporary program, and I was actually in a maintenance band 1 position for a couple years, and that was it was a godsend, because it was, we were broke all the time going to school. You know how going to school is, and you always feel that if I just didn't have to work, I could devote more time to school, and get through it better. But that's the way it is. So anyway, I left the park, and I worked at River Sawmills for 34 years, and
Where was that?
Red Crest. Yeah, we were the.
Was that before the park sort of enveloped Red Crest?
Well, it was it's 1968. The park just went to the edge of Red Crest, 1968. The addition of Pepperwood, the Avenue of Giants, through Holmes and Pepperwood and Eleanor, came in 1968. That's another interesting story. My father was involved in Jordan Creek. He was working there in the early 30s, or no, mid 30s. And so they had some park staff come down to look to make an offer on that stretch from Jordan Creek to Red Crest. And so before the park staff got there, they had fallen a couple of trees, and they were just full of rot. They still are. A lot of them were. But anyway, so my dad said they dickered over the price. They couldn't agree on a price. So the woods foreman says, okay, start up Jordan Creek, we're going to log there. And that was the end of that until 1968, when they renegotiated. And the park got that stretch, which they got Hammer Shoal Grove, which was nice. But there's 90% of those trees have rot in them. And there's bark beetles, there's all kinds of bad stuff, but they're beautiful trees. To me, they're the most valuable just how they look. That Drury Cheney Trail is the nurse log capital of the park. And then you have beds of sorrel. And say the Redwoods League was aware of that. There are pictures in 1938 of Drury Cheney Trail. And say the Redwoods League, this is on our agenda to acquire. And, oh, beautiful.
Do you happen to know what year that was acquired?
68.
Oh, as well.
Yeah, so it was 30 years after the league had their eye on it. Yeah.
When did you get involved with Save the Redwoods League?
Actually, when I got on patrol, I got to meet a lot of these people. I didn't get really heavily involved with them until I went to work at the Interpretive Association. And there was a couple old professors that were here in the early 60s. They'd come by, and I'd see them again. Dr. Libby and Wayne Macy, they were retired by then. But Dr. Libby, his favorite student was a kid from Pepperwood. So I got them reunited, which was really kind of nice. But so he would always invite me when he'd bring a group up to do a nature walk. We had, one time we had 40 foresters from New Zealand. Well, one was from Australia, and the only woman on the tour. And so I like to tease her, I said, how's it, you're the only woman on this tour, you're a forester in a man's occupation. And I said, how are they treating you? She says, surprisingly good. So we did a walk at Lower Bull Creek Flat. That's what I enjoyed about the association. I did walk there for Ohio State, Cal State Monterey, University of Utah. This was really neat. I enjoyed them. We had.
Well, how did they get in touch with you? Through Save the Redwoods League?
Yeah, and the association. Yeah, and the park. And because a lot of the rangers would just invite me along anyway.
So even when you stopped working for the park in what, 73, you said, and you were working in the mill, you were in the park.
Yeah.
A lot.
Well, that was, and the thing was too, I was working with this lady from the Sierra Club, And if anybody found out, I could have been fired from my job. The
At the mill.
lumber industry was really hostile, you know, the Sierra Club. Well, the national park, that was part of it too. You know, when they got involved with that, kind of pushed the league off to the side. David Brower, who had an acid tongue, he was pretty adamant, militant, and there's a lot of history right there too, of that whole national park.